48% of voters believe Joe Biden will be replaced as the Democratic nominee before November. Not only is he the oldest president in American history, but also the most unpopular. Perceived as a declining old man, Democrats may search for alternatives in order to avoid an election day thrashing. If this were to happen, Vice President Kamala Harris would no doubt be the favorite to replace Biden at the top of the ticket. In this video, we'll take a look at what the 2024 election map would look like if Biden was indeed replaced by his vice president. Joe Biden currently has a net negative 16.1% approval rating, with an overwhelming majority of the country disapproving of the job he's done over the past 3 years. If you compare this to the approval rating of presidents in the past, Donald Trump had a 46% approval rating at this time in 2020. Barack Obama and George W. Bush had approval ratings near the 50s, and they barely won their re-elections in 2004 and 2012, and Donald Trump, with a 46% approval rating, lost in 2020. Joe Biden is now only at 40%, and he is polling significantly worse than he did against Trump in 2020. Donald Trump, on the other hand, is more popular than he has ever been, with a net negative 8.9%. The last time he was this popular was before he was even a major contender for the 2016 Republican nomination over 8 years ago. Kamala Harris's popularity is very similar to that of Biden's. Her approval sits at negative 15.2. However, Joe Biden performed significantly better against Trump than Kamala Harris. In head-to-head polling between the incumbent president and the former president, Donald Trump leads Biden by 1.1%. However, he leads Harris by 6.6%, a considerably larger lead. Kamala Harris's biggest issue is that she is not a likable politician. She checked all the boxes for Joe Biden to be the vice presidential nominee in 2020, and she was able to win. However, not very many people voted for Joe Biden because Kamala Harris was on the ticket. Now, Donald Trump is very alienating for a big portion of the country, but with his base, Donald Trump is one of the most charismatic politicians. Kamala Harris is nearly the exact opposite. And so if Harris were to replace Biden, there's absolutely no guarantee that she is going to do any better than the incumbent president. And so now, turning to the map, we're going to fill in the solid states for both candidates. Kamala Harris is still going to manage to win most of the traditionally solid blue states. She's not going to have too much trouble winning Washington and California. Hawaii is also one of the bluest states in the country. It is shifting to the right, but even in a Kamala Harris scenario, she is still probably going to win it by over 12 points, which is the margin for a state to be solid. Now, she's not going to do too well in the Northeast. She has nearly no connection to this region of the country, and Hillary Clinton didn't even do very well in the Northeast in 2016 when Donald Trump was a much stronger nominee. Now, she is going to win Delaware, Maryland, and the District of Columbia, as well as the 1st Congressional District of Maine, but that is all she is going to win by a solid margin, giving her 105 electoral votes. As for Donald Trump, he is going to have no trouble winning most of the middle of the country, as well as near the entirety of the Deep South, South Carolina included, as well as Mike Pence's home state of Indiana and the state of Alaska. This gives Trump 125 electoral votes, and if Joe Biden was the nominee, these are the states that I would expect Trump to win by over 12%. But if Harris replaces Biden, I think Trump can have a very strong performance in the 2nd District of Maine, winning it by a solid margin, double his margin from 2020. Trump is also likely to win both Iowa and Ohio by solid margins, and even the state of Texas, 40 electoral votes, a state that has not been solid for the GOP since 2012. Before we continue, only 13% of you guys are subscribed, so please take this time to subscribe and join my Discord server to chat with me personally. Now, this will give Trump 189 electoral votes. He's already well ahead of Harris, and the reason being is that Kamala Harris simply is not going to perform well anywhere outside of the major cities. She has no rural appeal, and she doesn't have nearly as much support from the black vote as Joe Biden. And yes, Joe Biden is an old straight white man, while Kamala Harris is half African American. However, Kamala Harris did not do well among African Americans in the Democratic primary in 2020, and she is very not approved of by the black community, as nobody really feels that she's done anything for the African American community during her 3 years in the Naval Observatory. And so when looking at the rest of the map, Kamala Harris is not going to fare well in the Deep South. That is why states like North Carolina and Florida are both going to be likely Republican. Florida could realistically be solid, but on the presidential level, that hasn't happened for a very long time. And so to be more conservative, I am going to place it in the likely Republican column. These are going to be states that vote for either Harris or Trump by margins between 5 and 12%. Yes, Republicans did very well with Marco Rubio and Ron DeSantis winning their Senate and gubernatorial races in 2022 by solid margins, but in presidential elections, Florida has always been significantly more competitive. Up in North Carolina, it's not even going to be close. Kamala Harris, there's no reason to think that she's going to perform better than Joe Biden, who came relatively close, losing the state by 1.3%, but it's a state that hasn't gone for Democrats since Obama in 2008, and before that, Jimmy Carter in 1976. For Kamala Harris, she's going to win the states of Oregon, Connecticut, New Jersey, New York, as well as Illinois, all by likely margins. Colorado is probably going to be likely Democratic as well, and this will boost her up to 191 electoral votes. Now, a few more states for Trump in the likely column are going to put him even closer to 270. Georgia is going to be one of them. Once again, yes, Kamala Harris is the first African-American vice president, but her being black has not helped her electorally in the past, and she's not popular among that demographic. And so Georgia, a state Trump won by 5 points in 2016, he is likely to win by an even larger margin against Kamala Harris. We see the same thing happening in Arizona, 11 electoral votes. She does not have the appeal that Joe Biden did in 2020. And with Republicans performing significantly better than they did in the previous election in the state, Donald Trump leads by over 5% in both Arizona and Georgia, there's no doubt that Kamala Harris is going to do even worse than Joe Biden. And so with all of these solid and likely states filled in, the former president leads the vice president by 71 electoral votes. Now, you may now ask why we're even talking about this if Kamala Harris may even do worse than Joe Biden. But you have to consider that as election day nears, Joe Biden's mental capabilities are only going to decline. If you have 3 back-to-back terrible debate performances from the incumbent president, if he gets absolutely pummeled by Donald Trump, who is a very aggressive debater, Joe Biden could do worse in November than Kamala Harris would, and that is why Democrats are thinking about replacing him. Democrats have to also think about those down-ballot races, those very close Senate and House elections that will determine the balance of power on Capitol Hill, and that may prompt them to choose a different candidate to represent them at the top of the ticket. And so we're looking at the lean states. We only have one for Kamala Harris. New Mexico will vote for the vice president by a margin between 1 and 5%. It's the only state with a Hispanic majority, a demographic where Republicans continue to gain ground in every single election. Meanwhile, Republicans are going to pick up the silver state of Nevada, a state that hasn't gone red since 2004, a state that Trump didn't win in 2016 or 2020. It's going to be a major flip, giving him 6 additional electoral votes. He's also going to win the 2nd district of Nebraska. He won it in 2016, but then lost it by nearly 7 points in 2020. But against Kamala Harris, in a district whose lines have shifted to become slightly more conservative, Trump is likely to win it back. For Kamala Harris, she is going to win both Virginia and Maine, although by a tilt margins that may be under 1%. Republicans won the governorship in Virginia in 2021, Glenn Youngkin becoming the first Democratic governor in over a decade. In the state of Maine, the most recent poll shows Joe Biden leading Donald Trump by just 1% statewide. Both of these states have gotten closer over the last few years, and there's no reason why Trump is going to be competitive in a possible matchup against Kamala Harris. And in the remaining Rust Belt states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, Donald Trump is going to win all three of them. These are the states that got him to 270 in 2016, and he is likely to win them again to push him over that 270 electoral vote threshold to win back the presidency. He is also going to win in both Minnesota and New Hampshire, two states where Hillary Clinton only won by 1% in the 2016 election. These are achievable victories for the former president. He is simply too popular right now. He is more popular than Barack Obama was before the 2012 election. And so if Kamala Harris were to replace Joe Biden as the nominee, Donald Trump is going to win the election with 327 electoral votes to Kamala Harris's 211, which means that Donald Trump is going to win a second non-consecutive term.